Okay, Parshas Eikev. Okay, Parshas Eikev. Perik Yud, Pasuk Yud Beis. V'ata Yisrael ma Hashem Elokecha shol meimach. Now, O Israel, what does God ask from you? Ki im liyira es Hashem Elokecha, to fear God, your God. L'leches b'drachav, to follow in His path. Ula'ava also, to love Him. V'la'abod es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levav kol b'chol nafshecha, and to serve Him with your whole heart and your whole soul. And the Gemara in Brachas, talking about the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu asked, L'yira also. What does God ask from you? God hardly is asking anything from you, but just to fear Him. So the Gemara says, the Gemara asks the question, is fear of God such a small thing that Moshe Rabbeinu could say, what is God asking from you? So the Gemara says, Ein gabe Moshe milsus utrayihi. By Moshe Rabbeinu, it was a small thing. Okay, Moshe Rabbeinu was a nana, and he thought that the Jewish people, perhaps this is the way the simple reading of the Gemara is, the Jewish people were somewhat on his level, and since by him it was a milsus utrai, it was a natural thing. A fear of God just came naturally. So because of that, he said, what is God asking from you? Nothing very difficult, just fear of God. And many of the commentators, the Bali Machshava, they asked the question, certainly Moshe Rabbeinu understood that the Jewish people were not on his level. It's one of the animamins that never arose, and it's in the Torah, never arose among Klal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu certainly believed in the animamins. He believed in every word of the Torah. So what was the question? Why did he say, yes, he was an anav mikol adam, but nevertheless he had contact with reality. He understood. So why is it that he said, Ma Hashem Elokecha chafetz mimach? What is God asking of Shoel mimach? What is God asking of you? And there are many answers given to the question. I have discussed it in the past. And the answer that's popularly given, I think the Malbim, the Balatanya touches on it. Others, they say, Ein gabe Moshe, by Moshe. In other words, doesn't mean that Moshe was thinking of himself, using himself as the criteria. But Ein gabe Moshe, those that lived together with Moshe, that were near Moshe Rabbeinu, that were under his influence, that lived in his time. So milsus utrayihi, so fear of God was somewhat naturally, somewhat easier. So he was able to say, Ma Hashem Elokecha chafetz mimach. What sholom mimach? What is God asking of you? Now, I have a certain problem with it. It's not that that problem isn't addressed by many of the commentators who have suggested that answer. But the question I have is, Moshe Rabbeinu here is sort of parting from Klal Yisrael. He's leaving the Jewish people. This was, so to say, his last will. Chumash Dvarim is his last will and testament. So how do Chazal explain? How are we to understand Ein gabe Moshe, by Moshe? Moshe Rabbeinu is challenging the people how they will act when he is no longer there. He's soon going to leave the earth. He's giving over the leadership to Yoshua ben Nun. So what do you mean, Gabe Moshe? Near Moshe. That would have been proper at the very beginning of the journey. But here, Moshe Rabbeinu is soon going to join his ancestors. He'll be leaving. So, and I want to, now there are those that believe in this concept, and it has a basis in Kabbalah. I'm not chas v'shalom talking. Say Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't mean Moshe Rabbeinu mamish. That would be apicursus, but that there is what they say, a person in every generation that has a nitzutz, that has a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu in him. So Ein Gabe Moshe, if you are close to that person who is Moshe Rabbeinu's spiritual successor, the one who has that spark, that nitzutz of Moshe Rabbeinu, so then Yiras HaKeshem, fear of God, is something that flows naturally. The problem I have with that is that it should have been more explicit. I want to now, now in the past, I've discussed this question. The first question being, how does how do Ein Gabe Moshe? How is it? How do you mean? Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to Klal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu has contact with reality. He realizes the Jewish people. You see, the Musar he is giving the Jewish people. He understands that they're not on that level yet. So how does the Gemara say Ein Gabe Moshe? By Moshe, like Moshe is using himself as the standard that is easy for the Jewish people to accomplish and to reach. Now, in the past, I explained it with what my father, with an explanation that my father said regarding the Rambam. It's one of the most difficult Rambams in Hilchos Tshuva. The Rambam, in discussing freedom of will, so he says that a person has the ability to be a tzaddik like Moshe Rabbeinu, and a rasha and a wicked person like Yeravim ben Nevat. And the question is, how is it possible to suggest such a thing? It almost sounds heretical to say it. Many years ago, when I first became a rabbi, I was giving a shiur, and I mentioned that Rambam. And there was a certain person who was learned that was sitting at the shiur, and he said to me, I don't know every Rambam, but I know that it's impossible that the Rambam should suggest such a thing, should say such a thing. So I said, I understand your dilemma, but I took out the Rambam and I showed him the Rambam. So we have to understand, what did the Rambam mean? When the Rambam says that a person could be as righteous as Moshe Rabbeinu himself. There never arose in Klal Yisrael like Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's a fundamental belief that we have to have. So the answer my father gave was that each person, and I'll go into it, I've mentioned it before, my father would repeat it almost every year at the Yomim Noraim. So the answer he gave is each person has his own mission in life. And no person is held responsible for not reaching the level of the other person. A person is judged regarding how well he fulfilled his mission. And my father said that the Rambam, when he says every person has the ability to be like Moshe Rabbeinu, he meant to say that every person has the ability to fulfill his mission in life in the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu fulfilled his greater mission in life. And my father, and I've mentioned it many times, and my father would repeat it every year. By Yivra Elokim es Adam b'tzalmo, God created man in his image. B'tzelem Elokim boroso. In the image of God, he was created. And my father would ask, the pasuk is redundant. The verse in the Torah says God created man in his image. In the image of God, he was created. That's redundant. And my father said each person was created in his own image. And that's the image of God in him. In other words, we are all put into this world with a mission. And no two people have the same mission. Each person was created in his own image. My father would say, not a capital H, a small h. It's his own image. And that's the image of God that's in him. Because the image of God emanates from the mission that God gave him when he put him in this world. And we are responsible not for the mission, not for reaching the level of the greater people of the Rambam, of Rabbi Eikev, of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, but we're responsible for not fulfilling our mission in life. My father would always mention the thought of Rav Kook, and I remember once I attended the yahrzeit share of my uncle Zatzal, and my uncle also mentioned this thought of Rav Kook. We say in Yom Kippurim in the Vidui, at the end of the Vidui, until I was created, I wasn't worth anything. But now that I was created, it was as if I wasn't created. What does that mean? But Rav Kook said, at least the way my father and my uncle understood the thought of Rav Kook, that every person is put in a certain generation because in that generation, he has a mission to fulfill. Had I been put in a different generation, had I been put in an earlier generation, I would not be able to fulfill my mission in life. Not only that, but even in a later generation, I would not be able to fulfill my mission in life. My father would say, the Rambam, if he had been put in a later generation, there's no doubt that he would have been recognized as a great Talmid Chacham, but he would not have been able to fulfill the mission that he fulfilled in the generation he was placed. And when we say Vidui on Yom Kippurim, and we ask God for forgiveness, we are not asking God to forgive us for not being like the Rambam, for not being like Rabbi Eikev, for not being like the prophets. But we are asking God forgiveness for not being like ourselves. Elokai Atshon Litzarti, before I was created, I couldn't fulfill my mission in life. And that's why you didn't place me in those generations. But V'achshav Shnatzarti, but now that I was created in a generation and in a situation where I could fulfill my mission, it says if I wasn't created, because I am lax in fulfilling that mission that was given to me and that I could fulfill, and unfortunately that I am not fulfilling. So our mission, so the Rambam, when he says we could be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu, says that we could fulfill our mission in the same way as Moshe Rabbeinu fulfilled his mission. And now what I want to suggest, that perhaps the idea here is, but I want to suggest another possible approach and we could say that's what the Moshe Rabbeinu was telling the Jewish people. That's what the Gemara is explaining. In other words, obviously, the fear of heaven that Moshe Rabbeinu had is not the fear of heaven that is expected of us. But we are responsible for the degree of fear of heaven, of the service of God, the love of God. That is part of our mission, and that we are capable of doing. So when it says Ein Gabe Moshe, Milsus Utrayihi, Moshe understood that the other people were not on his level. He's constantly chastising the Jewish people. And also he knew what the Jewish people went through in Egypt. But his question is, what he's telling the Jewish people is, you can fulfill the mission, the challenge that you were given. And he's saying that on the basis, in a sense, he's using himself as an example, just as he fulfilled his mission. So we can fulfill our mission in life. And in a sense, so that's true about the generation that saw Moshe Rabbeinu. But we have to remember, most of the people at that generation, when Moshe Rabbeinu was about to leave the world, they saw Moshe Rabbeinu for less than 20 years. So Moshe Rabbeinu was not just talking to that generation. Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to all the future generations of the Jewish people. And this challenge that Moshe Rabbeinu is presenting, I think, is not just being presented to those people that were standing there, but it's being presented to all generations. But it is the responsibility of that generation to enable the Jewish people to use Moshe Rabbeinu as an example. Now, when we finish a Masechta and we make a siyum, so the one making the siyum, he recites at the completion of the Masechta a Hadran. And he says, Hadran Alecha Masechtas, whatever Masechta will be, we will return to you. We don't say goodbye to the Masechta, but we say we will be back. And then we say, and you shall return to us. We will return to you, and you will return to us. Our thoughts are on you, and your thoughts are on us. We will not forget you, and you will not forget us. So we're telling the Gemara, we're telling the Talmud, the tractate in the Gemara, that we understand we won't forget you. But what does it mean that the tractate won't forget us? What does it mean that the tractate won't forget us? I want to suggest, and it's much more than that, but this is included in it, especially when it comes to Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral tradition. Originally, the oral tradition couldn't be written down. There couldn't be a book. There couldn't be a tractate. But the situation, the changing situation, necessitated the putting into writing and the distribution of the tractates of the Gemara. And when it comes to Tanakh, the Tanakh ends. Each book of Tanakh ends where it ends. There's no additions to it. In fact, I think Rashi, Masechah Shabbos, when the Gemara talks about finishing a book, finishing the writing of a book on Shabbos, it's a violation of the Gemara, of the malacha, of the work of makabapatish, of completing something. So Rashi says it's talking about Tanakh. Doesn't why? Because every other book, even the Gemara, apparently, it's arbitrary where it ends. You can always add another sentence. When it comes to Tanakh, you can't add another sentence. This is especially true in Torah Shebaal Peh. So when we learn Torah Shebaal Peh, when we learn Gemara, in a sense, we become part of that Gemara. It might not be printed, but there is no end to it. There is no completion. So when we say, you won't forget us, we want to say that not just that we're going to return to learn, we'll be able to learn it, we'll learn it in greater depth. All that is true. But I think included in it is the idea that we are part of the Torah Shebaal Peh, of the oral tradition. And lo ba'alma hadei, not in this world, and certainly not in the next world. All the learning that we do in the Shas in heaven Doesn't end with Amar Rabbeinu and Ravashi. It continues throughout the generations. We all become part of it. I remember many years ago, a certain Talmud of my father's, a certain student of my father's, went over to my father, and I was standing right next to them, and I overheard the conversation. And that Talmud, he apparently thought that he had this ability of evaluating everything. So he says, everybody says over a certain thought of Reb Chaim, of my great-grandfather, my father's grandfather, Reb Chaim Brisker. He says, I don't believe that Reb Chaim could have said it. And my father apparently was taken aback by the manner that it was said. And my father said to him, not only did he say it, but I can tell you the exact words he used when he said it. And then my father repeated the words that he used. Now, my father was very young when Reb Chaim died, depending on which was his true birthday. In Europe, everybody had many different birthdays, depending when and where they were trying to get out of what country. So, but at most, my father was 1 year old, and it was during World War I. My father never met Reb Chaim. There is a letter from Reb Chaim to my grandfather, I was told, wishing my grandparents Mazel Tov on the birth of my father. But my father really never met Reb Chaim, and Reb Chaim never met my father. But nevertheless, in a sense, Reb Chaim didn't die. Reb Chaim was still alive. When my father heard shiurim from his father, he didn't just hear the shiurim of my grandfather, but he was hearing shiurim from Reb Chaim himself. It was more than just learning from a book. Reb Chaim was part. It wasn't just Reb Chaim's chiddush that he learned. But when he was being taught the Reb Chaim was part of the Torah, was part of the learning. And actually, if you look in the Chiddushei Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi, that's the one sefer I think that Reb Chaim, for the most part, keeps himself personally out of the sefer. But for those that had this special Masorah, when they learned Reb Chaim, it wasn't just the Chiddush that Reb Chaim said. It wasn't just the way he learned the Gemara. He himself was part of the Chiddush. And so, and that certainly is true about Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah's Moshe. And the truth is, while it's certainly true in regard to Torah Shebaal Peh, even in regard to Torah Shebechsav, the Zohar says, there's Midrashim that say that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah, equal to the number of Jews. It's symbolic. Equal to the number of Jews who left Mitzrayim, who went to Har Sinai, who ultimately entered Eretz Yisrael. Of course, it's more than that. 600,000 is a certain group, but it represents the idea of Klal Yisrael being part of the Torah, even the Torah Shebechsav. Now, one of the famous questions people ask is, if you count the letters, today it's easy to do with computers, it's considerably less. It's almost like half of that. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky gave an answer. He said, if you take a look at the various letters, the way it's written in the Torah, the Osios, the Tzuras Osios, many of the letters contain more than one letter in the way they're made. So he had a cheshbon that somehow it comes very close to the number of 600,000. I was thinking of another possible approach. We know that there were two alphabets given to the Jewish people. There was Ksav Livnoi and Ksav Ashuris. Ksav Livnoi was the form of the letters that was used up till the time of Ezra. But Ezra changed the form of the letters into Ksav Ashuris. And the Ritva says that both forms of letters were given at Har Sinai. And the Torah was given over in both forms, in Ksav Ashuris and Ksav Livnoi. A matter of fact, the Ksav Ashuris, the Bavli says, Mem v'samach shebeluchos b'neis hayog omei. The mem and the samach in the luchos, in the Ten Commandments, stood by a miracle, because the way it was engraven, because the letters were not attached, it was stood independently. So the mem and samach beluchos b'neis hayomei, and the Yerushalmi says ayin shebeluchos, the ayin in the luchos. Now, and the ayin in Ksav Livnoi, in the old script, the old Hebrew script, was a circle. And the Radvaz says that the first luchos was Ksav Ashuris. The second luchos was Ksav Livnoi. So, in other words, both forms of the Torah, of the lettering of the Torah, were given at Har Sinai. And so, with that assumption, we could see, and with other things also, we could see how the and very often we have drushos in the Gemara that are based on the fact that there is an extra vav or there isn't an extra vav. And in our when we look in the Torah, it isn't that way. But it could be that Ksav Livnoi, the word sometimes was written with the extra vav, and Ksav Ashuris without the extra vav. And the drushos were based on that. When the Gemara says that there were differences between the Sefer Torah of Rabbi Meir, the Medrash. The Medrash says there were some minor differences in the way words were spelt in the Sefer Torah of Rabbi Meir than the Sefer Torah the way we have it. And the question is, so Rabbi Meir's Sefer Torah is possible. It was also for him to have it. And what's the significance of the fact that it was different if it was possible, if it was no good? I want to suggest that perhaps Rabbi Meir's Sefer Torah was a Sefer Torah based on the old Ksav, on the old script. And why did Rabbi Meir have it? Because of the drushos. A matter of fact, the Gemara tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went up to Har Sinai, we went to Mount Sinai. So he saw B'mar HaNevuah how Rabbi Akiva was Doresh Kisrei Osios, how he made drushos on the basis of the crowns that are on the letters. And Moshe Rabbeinu himself didn't understand how to make those drushos. How is it possible that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand what Rabbi Akiva understood? But the answer is, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he saw the Torah initially, he saw it in Ksav Levnoi. Ksav Levnoi didn't have Kisrei Osios. I think the Brisker Rav points that out. It didn't have crowns on it. But Rabbi Akiva had Ksav Ashuris. But then, when he was up in heaven, and he saw the future, and he saw the Ksav Ashuris, and ultimately the first set of luchos was given to him with the Ksav Ashuris, according to the Radvaz. We could have said the reverse, but that's what the Radvaz says. So ultimately, he was able. He knew the drashos that will be made in future generations as well. But at that point, Moshe Rabbeinu only saw the Torah in Ksav Levnoi, so there were no Kisrei Osios. So he had to see the future, to see what the drashos could be made from the Kisrei Osios, from the crowns on the letters of the Torah. So there were 600,000. So there, between the two Masoros that were given, it's the same words, but some words, the letters were written differently. And perhaps in some of the words, there was a vav, an extra vav, not an extra vav. So altogether, there was over 600,000 letters between so we could explain the Zohar and the Medrash that says there are 600,000 osios in the Torah Shebechsav. But the main idea is that Klal Yisrael is part of the Torah. Perhaps not in the same manner as the Torah in the Torah Shebal Peh, but even in Torah Shebechsav, Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people are part of the Torah. So in a sense, when we learn Torah, it's not just that we're learning the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu gave, that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down from heaven. But to a certain degree, Moshe Rabbeinu and the Masorah that began with Moshe Rabbeinu throughout the generations continued. But the Masorah wasn't just each generation giving over to the next generation, giving over the Torah that they got from the previous generation. The Masorah has to be the giving over of those previous generations as well. And when we're learning Torah, all Klal Yisrael, throughout all the generations, is part of that Torah. Because Klal Yisrael and the Torah is one. The Jewish people, the Torah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all one. Matter of fact, it's brought down that when we hold the Sefer Torah up, when we're Mekadesh, when we say we're Mekadesh the Chodesh, that represents the idea of all Klal Yisrael being there, because the Sefer Torah combines the Jewish people, but it's not just the Jewish people of this generation; it's the Jewish people of all generations. So Moshe Rabbeinu is, in a sense, Moshe Rabbeinu continues to live. He didn't just give us the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu lives in the Torah. And the rest of Klal Yisrael, to a lesser degree, also lives in the Torah. And when we teach Torah, we have to teach it as the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu is giving over. Moshe Rabbeinu has to be part of the Masorah, not just the beginning of the Masorah. He has to be the part of the Masorah. And this, I think, is what So this is the idea that we could suggest actually combining the thoughts that others explain and that the suggestion that I made that when it said that Ma Hashem Elokecha chafetz mimach, what does God ask of you? What does God ask of you? But Yiro, so to fear Him. The chimilsus atrayi is a simple thing to have fear of God. Ein gabe Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu remains alive when we learn, and even the future generations remain alive, and they give us over. They give over not just the Torah of Moshe; they give over Moshe Rabbeinu. In a sense, with this, we can understand a thought that I've mentioned in the name of Reb Chaim many times, but I think this adds meaning to it. In Parshas Balak, so I discussed that the Alkut Shimoni, Lo Kam Bi Yisrael Kamoshe, they did not arise. The Torah says in Zos HaBracha, did not arise among the Jewish people like Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Alkut Shimoni says, Umos ha'olam kam, but among the nations of the world, they did arise like Moshe Rabbeinu. The Ezehu, who is it? It's Bilam Russia. Very strange. So Reb Chaim said two things. First of all, he said, in other words, the definition of Torah is that which was given by Moshe Rabbeinu. When the words left Moshe Rabbeinu's mouth, it became Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu oralized what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him as he was writing it, and it became Torah as it left Moshe Rabbeinu's mouth. Bilam Harasha, for whatever reason, when he was forced to say certain things, Matoba Alecha Yaakov, all that, it became Torah when it left Bilam Harasha's mouth. Even before Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it over and oralized it. Because the Umos Olam, the nations of the world, shouldn't have an excuse. You didn't give us a prophet like Moshe Rabbeinu. So this unique feature, this unique ability that Moshe Rabbeinu had in making Torah, it's Torah's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but giving Torah its status of Torah in a limited way was given over to Bilam Arash also in a certain isolated situation. And that's why the Gemara in Bava Basra says, Moshe Kosav Sifro Parshas Bilam. Moshe wrote his book, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, in Parshas Bilam. Parshas Bilam is also part of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Parshas Bilam became Torah even before Moshe put it in the Torah. When it left Bilam's mouth, it became Torah. But Reb Chaim added one thing I've always mentioned. Reb Chaim said there was a difference between Torah as it was made by Moshe Rabbeinu and Torah when it came out of the mouth of Bilam Arasha. I heard it from my father in the following manner. Reb Chaim said, Bilam Arasha was God's phonograph. Moshe Rabbeinu, it was Torah because of who Moshe Rabbeinu was. But I think it's more than just that. And I'm sure that's what my father meant to tell me over in the name of Reb Chaim. Moshe Rabbeinu was part of the Torah. When we learn Bereshis Bara Lakim Es Hashemayim Ves Haaretz, Psukim that don't talk even about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was part of that pasuk also. He's the one that's bringing it down from Har Sinai and giving it to us now. Bilam Arasha is not part of the Torah. Chas v'shalom. Bilam Arasha. The Torah tells us about him, like it tells us about Esav. But he's not part of the Torah. The Torah tells us about him. But he's not teaching us Torah. So I think this is the idea that we could say here also. On one hand, we by our learning Torah, if we have the proper approach of learning Torah, of seeing the generations of the Jewish people, of seeing the Masorah, not just as a way of giving over Torah, but the Masorah is part of the Torah. So all those previous generations, that golden chain of the Masorah is part of the Torah. So it's Ein Gabe Moshe. By Moshe. We're still by Moshe. And yes, we are not like Moshe. But even when it comes, but we are Gabe Moshe. If we're Gabe Moshe, that could give us the ability to fulfill our mission that we were given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Reb Chaim. Now, since it's Moshe Rabbeinu continues to serve as an example. Moshe Rabbeinu remains alive. He continues to serve as an example. I want just to add one thing. When the Torah tells us about Moshe Rabbeinu beginning his mission, Moshe Rabbeinu's mission in life is part of Torah, and that has to inspire us in our mission in life. When the Torah tells us about Moshe Rabbeinu, by Yigdal Moshe, Moshe becomes a gadol. Today, many yeshivas, when they start, so when they talk to the parents, they say, the purpose of this yeshiva is not to produce just Talmidei Chachamim. We want to produce Golim. Those people have lost contact with reality. And that's not the purpose. Yeah, we all want to be. But Vayikdal Moshe, there's no question when Moshe started out, he was a gadol and everything. There's no question about it. But godless doesn't just manifest itself in the Torah that I taught, but in what I did as part of the Torah. And what is the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu does? Vayikdal Moshe. Vayetze alachav. Vayar b'sivlosam. Jewish leadership manifests itself and not in withdrawing from our brothers from their suffering, but vayar b'sivlosam. Vayar ish mitzri makeh ish Yehudi mitochechav. And he sees an Egyptian smiting a Jew from his brothers. That's what godless is. You demonstrate godless, not just when you learn Torah, but when you become part of the Torah. Yes, learning is part of the Torah, but the way you act, that's also part of the Torah. The Masorah begins with Moshe Rabbeinu, and his mission begins by Vayetze alachav, vayar b'sivlosam. And now we are facing such a situation today. We're facing a situation today. I'm not talking about drafting yeshiva boys, not drafting yeshiva boys. That's not my concern. My concern is there has to be a vayar b'savlosam. There has to be sensitivity to what's going on, concern to what's going on. There can't be withdrawal. You can't make believe it's not happening. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't make believe it wasn't happening. If yeshivas want to produce golem, they have to emphasize to go out to his brothers. Vayar b'sablosam. Moshe Rabbeinu is alive. His example has to continue to inspire us. If we receive inspiration from Moshe, if Moshe Rabbeinu remains alive for us, not just the Torah remains alive, we have to be inspired by his example of Vayar b'sablosam, and we have to be sensitive to the issue and to what's taking place today. And we have to do our part. And especially we in the United States. The question we have to ask Jews of the United States, why aren't we required to go to Eretz Yisrael? There's a Mechemes mitzvah there. Hakol Yotzin. Okay, now you can't take planes. But why don't we have a requirement to go? The answer is every soldier has to be at his battlefront. He has to be at his post. And we in the United States can accomplish for the war. When you have a war effort, it's not just the one who shoots the gun. There's the one who cooks the food, the one who prepares the equipment. There's so much that goes involved in making a war. And it all has to be done. And in America, the war is being fought on a political level. And we have to let the politicians know that our number one criteria, our number one concern is Ish Ivri Mitochechav. Our Jewish brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, and our Jewish brothers and sisters all over the world. That's the role we have to play in the war. And right now, it's so important. Right now, people are trying to please everybody. And ultimately, they'll please nobody. But in the process, they might do a lot of harm to Achenu Beis Yisrael. And we have to let the example of Moshe Rabbeinu inspire us on our mission. We can't fulfill the mission the way Moshe Rabbeinu fulfilled it, but we can fulfill our mission in the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu fulfilled his mission.
Okay, so if anyone has any questions, put them in the chat. Why was there a change in the Ksav from Ksav Livnoi to Ksav Ashuris?
Well, my according to the Gemara was Xeris Akasav that to change. Apparently, it was easier to. Well, first of all, we had the drushos, and we could suggest that the drushos had to do with the Kisriosios, and as Klal Yisrael was spreading out, in other words, a lot of Torah Shabbal Peh was given over orally. But as Klal Yisrael was spreading out in the times of the Tanaim and Amoraim, they needed the sources for these halachas because the Masorah was coming weaker as they were spreading out. So Memela, the Ksav of the Ksav Ashuris, that gave a greater ability for drushos to learn out halachas, just like Rabbi Akiva did.
Is there a medrash that when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a third Ksav?
I'm not aware of that. There might be a medrash, but I don't have it.
A number I remember offhand, I think it's from Margolius, the one who wrote the Sefer on Sanhedrin. The Margolius say, there's 291,000 some psukim in our Torah.
Okay. So with what I answered,
right? Yeah, it fits. It fits. You said it
fits. And Rabbi Kamenetsky also had a roundabout number. It wasn't exactly, but so he said, because we say that we're not Baki b'chseris b'yaseris, so it could be. That's what Rabbi Kamenetsky suggested. I didn't want to go that far. Okay.
Does the Rav suggest anything we should do? Recommend something we should do for Tu B'Av?
Set up shidduchim for people.
Also, according to what the message of the share was, receive some that's part
of the Sivlosam.
Well, not just it, but also to make connections with other groups and people outside.
That's right. That's right. By the way, shidduchim. Way I explained the Gemara over there, at the end of Tainus, that the idea of the idea of shidduchim is the idea of making connections between Klal Yisrael, because there was a tendency to just marry within a family. But if you want to bring unity in Klal Yisrael, you create bonds between families. So that's part of the significance. Besides the fact that you help the individual people, the creation, making shidduchim creates a unity of Klal Yisrael. And right now, unfortunately, in time of trouble, unity is very, very important. And when you make shidduchim, there is you're creating unity in Klal Yisrael.
Okay, that's everything in the chat. So thank you, everyone. Have a good week. I wish you hear good news from Eretz Yisrael. And Achenu kol beis Yisrael netzum b'tzar v'shivya ha'omdi be'biyam be'oshem malkum rachem alem v'yotzim Yisrael v'rachem Moshe b'gulula hashta b'golaz and kriv namar amen.
Right. Okay, everything should go.